Hey everybody, Steve here, and welcome to GenX Countdown, the place where we dig up the coolest, weirdest, and most underrated treasures from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I make these videos in my work truck at lunch throughout the week and love digging these up. If you were the kind of kid who woke up early on a Saturday just to catch your favorite spacefaring heroes, this one's definitely for you. Today we're diving deep into 10 forgotten sci-fi cartoons that shaped a generation, but a few somehow disappeared into the black hole of nostalgia while others became legend. We've got everything from giant mechs and space warriors to post-apocalyptic pirates and legendary defenders. These weren't just cartoons, they were blueprints for our childhood dreams. And if you're still here, you already know this video was definitely made for you. Subscribe and let's get into it. We're going to be ranking these from the oldest to the most recent.
Robotech is back now!
Hercules, empowered with the strength of 100 men.
Before Super Friends took over the superhero cartoon landscape, Space Sentinels was already experimenting with a diverse cast of heroes, and in space no less. This animated series, produced by Filmation in 1977, followed three immortals, Hercules, Mercury, and Estrella, who had been plucked from ancient times and given superpowers to protect Earth from cosmic threats. The show is way ahead of its time in terms of representation. Estrella, a black female superhero, was one of the first of her kind in mainstream animation, something you didn't see often in the 70s. Mercury, with his super speed, and Hercules with his brute strength, completed the trio as they fought against robots, aliens, and intergalactic evildoers. The animation had that distinct Filmation style, reused frames, a bit stiff but undeniably nostalgic. The stories were surprisingly deep for a Saturday morning show. They combined mythology, sci-fi, and superhero action in a way that felt like a prototype for later shows like Defenders of the Earth or even Justice League. But here's the kicker, that despite being one of the earliest sci-fi superhero cartoons, Space Sentinels never really caught on the way other shows did. Maybe it was the competition, or maybe it was just too ahead of its time. But either way, it deserves a spot in the hall of forgotten sci-fi greatness. I don't recall the Sentinels myself for our next upcoming edition. I was 4 and 5 when these came out, and man, I don't even know if we had a TV back then. I think my life didn't really start till I was about 7 years old, to be honest.
Dale and Zarkov have set out for Mongo on a mission of mercy to prevent the...
Man, Flash Gordon, the king of pulpy, swashbuckling sci-fi adventures. Most people remember the 1980 live-action movie with its Queen soundtrack and ridiculous campy charm, but Filmation's 1979 animated series deserves its own spotlight for sure. Unlike the more comedic, over-the-top film version, this cartoon was shockingly serious and true to the original 1930s serials. The story followed Flash Gordon, Dale Arden, and Dr. Hans Zarkov as they fought against the tyrannical Ming the Merciless on the planet Mongo. There were alien races, sky cities, and intense dogfights, basically everything a good sci-fi adventure needs. What really set this show apart was its serialized format. Instead of random standalone episodes like most cartoons at the time, Flash Gordon had an ongoing storyline, something incredibly rare in the 70s. It felt like an epic, not just a cartoon. And let's talk about the visuals. For a Filmation show, the animation was surprisingly fluid. The painted backdrops were gorgeous, and the alien designs were straight out of the 1930s pulp magazine. But despite its quality, Flash Gordon never reached mainstream success. Maybe it was the fact that Star Wars had already set the gold standard for sci-fi by 1979, or maybe kids just weren't ready for serialized storytelling. Whatever the reason, this version of Flash has been largely forgotten. Let me know if you recall the movie or if the cartoon was the first time that we all saw it.
Against the Earth Federation. Initial fighting lasted over 1 month and saw both sides lose half their respective populations.
Now, Mobile Suit Gundam is a name that's legendary today, but back in the early 80s it was a hard sell, at least outside Japan. Originally airing in 1979, Gundam wasn't your typical good versus evil space adventure. This show introduced something groundbreaking, realistic war drama in a giant robot series. Instead of superheroes piloting mechs in to fight aliens, Gundam gave us a war story, one with politics, moral dilemmas, and a whole lot of tragedy. The original show followed a Moro Ray, a teenage pilot who gets thrown into an interstellar war between the Earth Federation and the space-dwelling Xeon forces. Unlike previous mecha cartoons where the hero jumps in the cockpit and instantly becomes a pro, Amuro struggles. He's scared, reluctant, and at times kind of an ass, which made him all the more real to us. And let's talk about the Gundam itself, which was a towering white and blue war machine that became an icon. The show introduced real robot mechanics, meaning the mechs had limited ammo, maintenance issues, and real military tactics. This wasn't Voltron or Menzinger/Transor Z. It was close to Battlestar Galactica, but with robots. Initially, Gundam struggled in Japan and in the US. It barely made a blip in the 80s, but thanks to model kit sales and later adaptations like Gundam Wing in the 90s, it became one of the biggest sci-fi franchises of all time. If you were lucky enough to see one of the early Gundam adaptations in the 80s, you were ahead of the curve. Our next entry is a true kaleidoscope of animation, for better or worse. That last read was a little rough, apologies. As I said, I do make these in my truck at lunch, and I'm chowing down on some Wendy's and having a hard time with my Diet Coke and burping. But we're going to make it through this one. Force 5. Force 5 isn't a single show. It was a Frankenstein's monster of anime cobbled together for American audiences in the early 80s. And if you grew up in New England or watched syndicated TV at weird hours, you might remember this one. Force 5 was actually 5 different Japanese mecha shows. They were repackaged and localized for US television, and the most famous of them was Star Avengers, which was actually Getter Robo G in Japan. This was classic super robot insanity. 3 separate jets that combined into 3 different giant robots, each with their own devastating attacks. The plot of Star Avengers pitted humanity against the Pandemonium Empire, a race of underground mutants who wanted to take over the surface world. The show was pure 70s and 80s anime madness. They had huge explosions and ridiculously over-the-top attacks, and heroes yelling their attack names at full volume. But what made Force 5 special was that at a time when American kids had Transformers and Voltron, this one was one of the first real doses of unfiltered Japanese mecha action. The animation was grittier and the action was more intense, and there's a feeling that this wasn't just a toy commercial, it was something raw. Sadly, Force 5 faded into obscurity after its initial run, mostly because it was never fully distributed across the US. But if you were one of the kids lucky enough to catch it, you knew you were watching something different. And this next show was basically my childhood. I was 12 when the next one came out, and I couldn't wait to watch the next episode, and I know I'm not going to do it justice, but I'm going to give it a shot. If there's one name on this list that still has a massive fan base, it's Robotech. I was nervous to even highlight it as the fan base is knowledgeable, dedicated, and ruthless. But back in the 80s, most of us had no idea we were actually watching a mashup of 3 different anime series, all cleverly stitched together by Harmony Gold to create one long epic sci-fi saga. At its core, Robotech was about humanity's fight for survival against alien invaders, with the help of advanced mech technology salvaged from a crashed alien spacecraft. The show followed multiple generations of pilots, warriors, and survivors across 3 main sagas. The Macross saga, the most well-known and honestly my favorite, where Rick Hunter and his crew battled the giant alien Zentradi. The Masters saga, which focused on a new war against the Robotech Masters and the new generation, bringing in the Invid invasion and a desperate rebellion. But what really set Robotech apart was its mature storytelling, and unlike other Saturday morning cartoons of the like, Robotech had actual character deaths, romance betrayal, and long-term consequences. When a pilot went down, they stayed down. The animation quality varies since it came from 3 different shows, but the mecha designs, especially the Veritech fighters, were unforgettable. These weren't just robots, they were fighter jets that transformed into humanoid war machines, giving it a more military tactical feel. And when those legs and arms popped out, it was on. Robotech was one of the first anime series that truly hooked American audiences, paving the way for shows like Gundam Wing and Neon Genesis Evangelion in the 90s. And while licensing issues have kept it from thriving like other franchises, it still has a cult following to this day. And if you were lucky enough to get your hands on these toys, let me know, because they were super detailed.
Imagine feeding the entire world. No more hunger.
Man, what happens when you take Flash Gordon, the Phantom, and Mandrick the Magician, throw in some futuristic tech and put them up against Ming the Merciless? You get Defenders of the Earth, a cartoon that should have been a massive hit, but somehow faded into obscurity. Airing in 1986, Defenders of the Earth was basically an Avengers-style team-up of classic comic strip heroes. Each hero had a unique skill set. Flash Gordon, the fearless space adventurer, and the Phantom, a jungle warrior with mystical strength. Mandrick the Magician is a master illusionist, and Lothar's Mandrick's powerhouse ally. But here's the twist. Instead of just being a nostalgia trip, the show introduced their kids as the next generation of heroes. Flash's son Rick, the Phantom's daughter Jetta, and a few others rounded out the cast. The main threat, though, was Ming the Merciless, still scheming to conquer the Earth. And what's so great about Earth? Why does everybody want it? The animation was actually pretty solid for the time, and the action sequences that had classic pulp adventure feel to them. It even had an epic theme song that screamed 80s Saturday morning hype. But despite the star power of these legendary characters, Defenders of the Earth didn't last long. Maybe it was the Transformers and G.I. Joe dominance, but maybe kids just didn't connect with these older comic heroes. Whatever the reason, it slipped through the cracks either way. That said, it's a must-watch for anyone who loves classic pulp sci-fi and team-up adventures. Did anyone here see Defenders of the Earth back in the day, or is this one a completely new set to you? Let me know below. I honestly missed most of these. Flash I saw and loved, but Defenders, admittedly, I don't recall this one.
The year 2525. A teleportation experiment goes wrong.
Here's a deep cut for the true Saturday morning warriors, Macron 1. A show that very few people remember, but those who do, they remember it fondly. This was yet another Frankenstein anime localization, much like Robotech and Force 5. It took footage from two completely separate Japanese series, Go Shogun and, bear with me here, Aku Dasakusen, Strungle, Aku Das whatever, and mashed them together into a brand new storyline. The premise: Earth is under attack by an evil empire called Grip, and the Macron team is humanity's last line of defense. They pilot the massive Macron 1, a powerful mecha with a very Voltron-esque vibe, designed to repel Grip's forces. The show had a split setting alternating between a futuristic sci-fi city and deep space battles. It tried to be a mix of Transformers, Voltron, and Robotech, but with a lighter tone. Unlike Robotech's war-torn drama, this one leaned into more traditional 80s action cartoon formulas, which were big explosions, fast-paced dogfights, and a clear-cut good versus evil story. Unfortunately, the animation quality was wildly inconsistent since it was pulled from different sources, and the storytelling didn't quite match the depth of Robotech or Gundam. And because of this, it never really took off like its competitors. That said, if you were a kid in 1986 and had access to syndicated stations that aired it, this show felt like it was destined to be huge. It had the theme song, the giant robot, the space battles, but somehow it just faded into the void.
Deep in the South Pacific, a tumultuous and untamed new continent has erupted, spawned by a highly unstable new element known as Theta.
All right, we're going to switch gears a bit. We're going to talk about Sky Commanders. And while Sky Commanders might not have been a space show per se, it did have one of the most sci-fi premises ever, which was high-tech soldiers battling over an unstable, energy-filled continent suspended in the sky. Hence the name Sky Commanders. Released by Hanna-Barbera in 1987, this show followed a team of elite warriors led by General Mike Summit. Their mission was to stop the evil General Lucas Plague and his raiders from seizing control of the High Frontier, which was a floating landmass packed with volatile energy called Theta 7. And what made Sky Commanders unique was its gimmick. The entire show revolved around the characters swinging, ziplining, and climbing using high-tech grappling gear. Every episode was basically Mission Impossible in midair, laser fights, sabotage missions, and tactical zipline warfare. Of course, this was also a toy commercial. The action figures come with zip lines set up so kids could recreate the insane stunts from the show. It was one of those late 80s experiments where networks were desperately trying to one-up G.I. Joe Unmasked with unique gimmicks. Sadly, it only lasted one season, and the animation was decent. The action was fun, but it just never found its audience. Maybe the concept was too out there, or maybe it got overshadowed by heavier hitters of the time, as we mentioned. Either way, Sky Commanders remains a forgotten relic of late 80s sci-fi action. Let me know in the comments if you guys had these toys. I definitely saw them. I saw the commercials. I wanted them. Never got my hands on them.
The alien world of Mer is being devoured by dark water. Only Ren, a young prince, can stop it.
This was a huge favorite in the comments, and it comes up all the time. It's 1991, however. But this is 70s, 80s, and 90s. We are spanning 3 decades here. Now, this is the show that should have been legendary. Pirates of Dark Water was one of the most ambitious animated series of the early 90s, and it was blending high fantasy sci-fi and swashbuckling adventure into something that felt truly different from everything else on TV. The story followed Ren, a young prince who discovers that his world Myre is being consumed by a mysterious, sentient substance called dark water. To stop it, he must gather the 13 treasures of Rule, all while evading the villainous pirate Bloth, who commands a massive monster ship and an even nastier crew. I mean, they're all pirates. The world building in Pirates of Dark Water was next level. Instead of traditional oceans, Myre was filled with strange alien landscapes, skyships, and bizarre creatures that felt like they belonged in a Star Wars movie. But here's the tragedy. The show never got to finish its story. Due to budget issues and poor scheduling, Pirates of Dark Water was canceled before all 13 treasures were found. Fans were left hanging, as with many of these shows they were, and to this day, it remains one of the biggest what could have been cartoons of the 1990s. The fact that so many people mention Pirates of Dark Water in the comments as a missed opportunity is proof that they really should have kept going and stuck it out. This one I did see, I do recall this one, and I loved this show. Anything with pirates had my sign of approval.
This is the inner sphere. Thousands of planets colonized by humankind. Once it was united under the stars.
This next one was near and dear to me, 1994. My lord, how old was I then? I mean, I had graduated high school in 91, 18, 19, 20, 2021. I think I predate this cartoon, and I think there's a reason why. Because I played the tabletop game earlier than this. But finally we come to the most underrated sci-fi mecha series ever, BattleTech the Animated Series. This was the American adaptation of the BattleTech Mech Warriors universe, which was a franchise that was already massive in tabletop game and in PC simulations. The PC game was intense and it was awesome as well. This cartoon was aired in 1994, and the show followed Adam Steiner, a noble warrior leading a ragtag resistance against the invading clan Jade Falcon, an advanced and ruthless faction with superior mech technology. Unlike most cartoons at the time, BattleTech took itself very seriously. The wars were brutal, the politics were complex, and the show made it clear that not everyone was going to make it out alive. The big selling point, CGI battle sequences, honestly, they don't hold up today. But back then, groundbreaking. This was one of the earliest attempts to blend traditional animation with 3D graphics, and they were using computer-generated mechs for the show's big fight scenes. Again, looking back, the CGI hasn't exactly aged well, but in 1994 was mind-blowing. Unfortunately, BattleTech only lasted 13 episodes, largely because it was too complex for younger audiences. It didn't have a toy line to keep it afloat, but for fans of tactical mech warfare, it was a hidden gem, one that deserves way more recognition. I mean, I would get these little models and I would paint them, and I would put little burn holes in them to make it look like they've been in a war. This is such a core memory for me. I played the game and played the tabletop game more than I watched this cartoon. But it's a great one. Let me know in the comments if you guys have played the game, remember this cartoon, or had any interaction with the Mech Warrior universe. It was a blast. From the mythic heroics of Space Sentinels to the war-torn battles of BattleTech, these shows pushed the boundaries of animation, storytelling, and sheer creativity. Some of them were ahead of their time and became legendary like Robotech, while some were victims of bad luck, and others, well, they just got lost in the noise of Transformers and G.I. Joe, as so many greats did. But now it's your turn. Which of these do you guys remember, and did you wake up early for Robotech, or did Pirates of Dark Water leave you hanging? Did you just discover a new favorite toy you wish you'd seen? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If you made it this far, you're definitely one of us, so hit that subscribe button and stick around for more deep dives into the best forgotten gems of the Gen X era. Stay cool, everybody.